Today, we're going to go back to our essay writing workshop, and we're going to look at evidence and analysis today. We canceled the first essay, so we're going to finish up looking at the last few elements of what we would do on that essay, and then we're going to transition into narrative essay. So it's probably going to be 30 minutes essay or analysis and evidence, and then 30 minutes on narrative essay. But we'll try to go faster through analysis and evidence. Oops. So let's start here. We're going to look at textual analysis and evidence. And just so that you remember why this is important, after the narrative essay that we're going to do this week and next week, we're going to come back and write another expository essay. And in that one, we're going to focus on what kind of evidence, what kind of claim do we want to make. So one thing that we'll have to do when we look at a quote by another author is textual analysis, so that we're able to determine which evidences are the best ones to use in an essay. So could I have you read here under textual analysis and evidence?
Textual analysis is studying the evidence in a text to understand its meaning. Mm-hmm. Textual evidence is information in the text that backs up mm-hmm. your analysis.
Good. So when we look at quotes by other authors, we make an analysis of what exactly do we think it means. And to back up that analysis, we need to find evidence in the text. So
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question about the pronunciation
analysis.
On back with a S at the end. How you pronounce?
Backs, like it has an S on the end. Backs.
Okay, backs. I was not sure how to do that. And analyze?
Yeah, the verb is analyze, but the noun is analysis. So the emphasis changes to the A. Analysis.
Analysis. Okay.
And that's pretty common. Verbs like to push their accent to the end of the word, but nouns like to keep their accent towards the front.
Okay. Vale.
Okay, good. All right, so what is analysis then? Could you read this?
Analysis is a close examination of the parts of a structure of something, usually as a basis from understanding, discussing, and interpreting it.
Good. Very good. So that's what we're trying to do, right? That's what an expository essay is. We're trying to understand someone else's thoughts. So we want to understand it, discuss it, or interpret it. The basis of that is analysis. All right, so when we are finding our evidences inside the text, we have two kinds of evidence. We have explicit evidence or implicit evidence. Could you read this brief description of the difference between explicit and implicit?
There are two kinds of textual evidence, explicit and implicit. Explicit evidence is proof plainly stated in the text. For instance, if your dad is upset because you didn't clean your room, he might tell you, "I'm annoyed that you didn't clean your room. I'm getting pretty tired of asking you to do it." Implicit evidence is evidence that is only implied by what is stated in the text. For example, if you come home and your dad is frowning and stomping around the living room, you might guess that dad seems mad about something. That is implicit evidence that you could infer from.
Good. So the word explicit has the same root word as our expository essay. It's going to be more concrete, whereas implicit is going to be something that we can infer. And inference is something that we make when we analyze a situation and we draw a conclusion from that, but it's not explicitly said to us. So we're going to look at this brief story. It's just one paragraph. It's an excerpt from a story by Alice Ruth Moore, and it's called In Our Neighborhood. And we're going to look at what kind of evidence the neighbors who are observing this, the Hart family, what evidence does the neighbor use to conclude that this family is having a party? So could you read this paragraph for me?
The Hart, the Hart were going to give a party. Neither Mrs. Hart, not the Mrs. Hart, not the small and busy Hart, who amused themselves in the neighborhood by continually falling in the gutter on a special occasion, had mentioned this fact to anyone. But all the interest, the denizen of that particular square could tell by the unusual air of bustle and activity which pervade the hard domicile. Okay, that was a hard one.
That was a hard one. And denizens is that word. It's kind of hard. It's similar to citizens, but citizens is of a country. Denizens would just be locals here in that neighborhood. So here the neighbor makes a claim. The claim is
I don't understand the meaning of bustle.
bustle. Bustle is to move busily.
To move what?
The air of bustle. Bustle
Sí.
is busyness.
Oh, okay, vale.
So they're very busy
Okay.
activities. So the Harts are going to have a party. This is the claim of the neighbors who are watching the Harts work. But she says that they hadn't mentioned this fact to anyone. The Harts didn't tell anyone they're going to have a party. So how does the neighbor know that they're going to have a party? What evidence does she give you?
An unusual air of bustle and
Mhm.
activity.
Exactly. So there's an unusual air of bustle and activity. And she says this is different from how they normally act. They normally, it says neither Miss Hart nor the Mrs. Hart nor the small and busy Harts, which are the kids, who amuse themselves and the neighborhood by continually falling into the gutter on special occasions. So normally they're acting in an amusing way, but now they're very busy and active trying to put together a party. So that's the evidence that she gives us. Is it implicit or explicit evidence?
This this is implicit. We infer that.
Exactly. It's implicit evidence because we have to infer this information. We have to check with these neighbors in order to have concrete proof of this. But we can make this guess, and it's a logical guess. So here, can you read the conclusion here, the analysis?
Yes. Okay. The author doesn't include any discussion by the Hart family where they say we are having a party. So there is not explicit evidence of a party. However, the author writes that the neighbors are guessing there will be a party based on implicit evidence. They see the Harts preparing their house for a party. When we make a guess based on implicit or explicit evidence, we are drawing an inference.
Very good. Thank you. All right, so that's a little practice. We're going to do one that's a little longer, looking at Don Quixote. So we know Don Quixote. We like Don Quixote. He's funny. Could you read this analysis
Sí.
below the name Don Quixote?
In Don Quixote, Miguel Cervantes describes an old man who has read many adventurous stories and decides to set out on an adventure of his own.
Right. Right. So you're very familiar with Don Quixote, right?
Yeah, we study a lot
Yeah,
of
you know his
that.
antics. So you're already going to be pretty
Yes.
familiar with what he's up to here. but we're going to look for some implicit and explicit evidence to prove that he's not really sane. He's not thinking properly.
Okay.
All right, so could you read this? There's going to be
In
4
short,
paragraphs.
see. In short, his wits being quite gone, he hit upon the strangest notion that ever man mad in this world hit upon, and that was that he fancied it was right and requisite, as well for the support of his own honor as for the service of his country, that he should make a knight errant of himself, roaming the world over in full armor and on horseback in quest of adventures, and putting in practice himself all that he had read of as being the usual practice of knight errant.
Good. So the author, the writer of this story, writes in the first sentence, his wits being quite gone.
What
So,
that mean? What that mean? Wits.
so here, wits, because you remember last we were talking about wit as humor, as being funny. Here,
Okay.
it's used in the old sense in English, and to wit used to be the verb for to think or to have knowledge. So here, when he's using wit, because this is an older story, his wits being quite gone means that his thinking isn't quite right. He's not capable of thinking well. And then he uses the words, he hit upon the strangest notion that ever a madman in this world hit upon. So now he's calling Don Quixote a madman. So this author, it's his responsibility now to give us some evidence for his insanity. What exactly makes the author think that Don Quixote is crazy? What kind of evidence?
What that mean? What that mean? Fancy.
Fancy is to like or to think about. So he fancied it was right and requisite. It means that this is his preference to think.
Okay.
So he thinks it's his duty, his requirement. That's what it means by fancy. Another word for think.
Okay.
So he thinks it's his right. He thinks it's his requirement, as well for the support of his own honor, as for the service of his country. So he's promoting his own honor and the honor of his country, that he be made a knight errant of himself. So he makes himself a knight. So far, there's no really explicit evidence in this paragraph, right? He hasn't done anything crazy.
Give me a moment. I have a call from the school of my kids. Give me a moment.
No problem.
See? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Sorry. It's if it's not the school, I will not take the call. But because it's the school, maybe it's something. Don Quixote is a madman. Exactly. I will say, like, he fans it was right and requisite. That will be something, and support, and for the support of his own honor and the service of his country. Yeah. So I mean, all of that is almost, the knight errant of himself.
Yeah, of himself. Yeah. That word fancied, I think you hit upon that. Fancied means it's his own thinking. It means he doesn't have any reason. It's what he wants to think. The other one that I'd say is down here is putting in practice himself all that he had read of as being the usual practices of knights. He's getting all of his ideas from what he's read, not from experience. So we start to get this idea of maybe Don Quixote is not prepared for his task. So could you finish this paragraph?
Righting every kind of wrong and exposing himself to peril and danger, from which, in the issue, he was to reap eternal renown and fame. Already the poor man saw himself crowned by the might of his armed emperor of 3 bison at least, and so led away by the intense enjoyment he found in these pleasant fancies, he set himself forthwith to put his shame is I don't know how you read that word.
Schema.
Schema, okay. Schema into execution.
Okay. So yeah, what he's read, he thinks that it's his duty now to right every wrong and to expose himself to peril and danger. So the job of a knight is to get into trouble, in other words, in his thinking, is to find trouble and to fix it. And he says he can already see in his mind that the least they can do is to crown him. He's going to be, he's going to reap eternal renown. He's going to be famous forever because of his knighthood. Okay, so let's keep going. We've got this and then one more paragraph to read about Don Quixote.
The first thing he did was to clean up some armor that had belonged to his great-grandfather and had been for ages lying forgotten in a corner, eating with rust and covered with mildew.
Mildew. Mm-hmm.
He scoured and
Scoured.
polished
That's okay.
it as best he could, but he perceived one great defect in it, that it had no closed helmet, nothing but a simple morion. This deficiency, however, his ingenuity supplied. For the country, sorry, it's been hard to read
That's
that.
okay. That's okay.
For the contrived a kind of half helmet of pasteboard which fitted on the morion, looked like a whole one.
Right. So he found his grandfather's rusty old armor. And what's wrong with the helmet?
That he has not, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have the whole helmet together, right? So what does he do to fix it?
A kind of half helmet of pasteboard.
Yeah, he makes a half helmet of pasteboard. Paste is glue, and board would be like cardboard here. So he's using pasteboard like you would use to make out of cardboard. He makes himself a helmet.
Okay.
All right. So now we're starting to see a little crazy, right?
Sí.
Maybe he's not reasonable. All right, here's the last one. Could you read this?
And fit to stand a cut, he couple of slashes, the first of which undid in an instant what had taken him a week to do. The easy with the ease with which he had knocked it to pieces disconcerted him somewhat, and to guard against that danger he set to work again, fixing bars of iron on the inside until he was satisfied with its strength. And then, not caring to try any more experiment with it, he passes it and adopted it as a helmet of the most perfect construction. So no more experiment.
No more experimenting. That might
Just
be
in case, yeah.
just in case. It
He's
says
very
no,
smart.
like
He's smart, but he's not stupid.
yeah. So he's not all with it. Well, here's an interpretation.
Yeah.
Could you read this interpretation of the paragraph we just read?
Yeah. To paraphrase, the main character decides to become a knight errant or a medieval knight who searches for adventure. He imagines himself rewarded by kings of his deeds. To that end, he fixes up some old armor adds iron to the helmet, but he does not.
Are you there?
Can you hear me?
A little bit. It's going in and out, but we'll keep going. So
Yes.
this interpretation or this claim, these are the evidences that someone found to say that Don Quixote is a little crazy, right? To that end, he fixes up some armor.
Yep.
He's prepared a helmet that doesn't stand to a test. He adds an iron to the helmet, but he doesn't test it again. This would be a good paragraph giving evidence for someone's thoughts on Don Quixote and that claim that was made in the first sentence. Let's see. You want me to read this one? Or do you want to read this one again?
If you want, I can try.
You can try? Okay.
After reading this paragraph, you may draw the inference that Don Quixote is not qualified to be knight errant. Some explicit evidence might be that he does not have the proper equipment. Some implicit evidence might be that he only knows what it's like to be a knight errant from reading stories. The author is suggesting that Don Quixote doesn't have a real life training he needs. He may also point to the implicit evidence that he determines his makeshift helmet the most perfect construction, even though he has not tested it. The writer is implying that Don Quixote is perhaps not smart or though
Thorough.
enough
Mhm.
or not sane enough to
Mhm.
become a knight errant.
Right. So would you agree with that analysis of Don Quixote?
I will be agree with all, but I will not be agree with that he's not smart. Actually, I think he's very smart because
He
I will
is.
think that he knows that probably is not going to work, so he don't try it, so he will not fail. So I think
Yeah,
that that is more smart than actually trying.
right. If he wants to accomplish his own ends, maybe he doesn't want to be proven wrong.
Well, I
Uh,
think that he knows that it's not so important that actually that stand because he knows that it's kind of a fantasy, and
yeah,
if he really thinks that he's going to die, he probably will be sure that that is working. So I think that he's like it's like a dream for him to be that and a fantasy becoming true. But he's in the age of madness, but still not so bad.
well, this brings up a perfect example, right? He's listed three qualities here. He says Don Quixote is not smart or thorough or sane. Well, he's given you three evidences for his claim, but one of them to you is disagreeable. So perhaps this would be a stronger statement if he didn't include smart, if he just said perhaps he's not thorough enough or sane enough. Now his
I don't
argument is
know what that means. I don't know what that means. Throw enough.
thorough would mean to fully test oneself. So he's not being thorough means he hasn't completed his preparation.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, I never heard that before.
Yeah. So to be thorough Like if I finish my homework thoroughly, it means I finished every single bit and my studying and everything, completely finished it. So he's not being very thorough
Yeah.
or careful in his
Like you
part.
go through it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
evidence for that we could say is that he
So
doesn't test
smart, thoroughly. And what is the other? The
smart,
third
thorough, and sane.
thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can find evidence in the text for thorough or sane, but you can't find good evidence for smart, it's best not to use the word smart, right? Because then somebody might argue with it in their mind, and then they don't trust your statements. So only using the words that you can give evidence for in the text.
And, yes. And also because it's an interpretation, you can
Mhm.
interpret that is not smart. But in my interpretation, the way that I seen, I will say that no, actually it was smart. But
Mhm.
I think interpretation make that your experience count.
Right? But at that point, it's going to be his duty, if he wants to use the word smart, to
Yeah.
convince you that that means he's not
Yeah.
smart. Otherwise, it's
Okay.
evidence. When we're writing an expository essay, we can't rest on the, well, to me, this isn't smart. We need to be able to back it up with evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's look at best evidence. What is going to be the best evidence we can choose? So could you read this paragraph about making best evidence?
Most texts are full of evidence. It is easy to pull out one piece or more, but it's usually more useful to focus on the best evidence. When you are looking for the best evidence to support a deduction, ask yourself, would anyone agree that this evidence leads to my conclusion? Yeah,
Right. And that's everyone,
it
right?
was just talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we just talked about that. So let's practice a bit. Here are 5 different statements or 5 different pieces of evidence from Don Quixote, and we're going to analyze them next to each other and decide between 2 of them which one would be the best evidence. So let's go a little faster, and we'll just line these 2 up. Can you read these 2 pieces of evidence?
Don Quixote imagined that he can repair Buster and Milway armor with pasteboard.
Right. So here are 2 things, and these are pieces of evidence. They're facts from the story, and both are true. But if I'm going to write an essay about Don Quixote's insanity or lack of thoroughness, which piece of evidence am I going to use as my stronger evidence? Which one shows what you're trying to bring out about Don Quixote?
Well, definitely, I will say the second because it's something that we can measure.
It's something we can measure, exactly. We can give reasons why this is not going to work, and we can see later in the story why this isn't going to work. But
Yeah.
evidence number 1, Don Quixote imagines that he should become a knight. Well, most kids imagine that they could become a knight, right? This doesn't
Yeah.
make one crazy. But the
Yeah.
fact that he actually goes through with it, that's going to be stronger evidence.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not so strange for Don Quixote to imagine becoming a knight. After all, most of us dream at some point that we might become a basketball star, a famous singer, or even the president, but most of us know that we can't repair medieval armor with pasteboard.
Yeah.
Not
It's
knowing
what I was
that,
thinking.
Don
Yeah.
Quixote seems out of touch with reality. So
I
he's out of
yeah,
touch with reality.
I will be agree.
So how about here, between these 2? Can you read them both?
He does not test the armor after he fixes it a second time. He imagines kings will reward him.
Right.
But for truly, I
Mhm.
will say the first one,
Uh-huh.
it's a strong evidence because he don't go through the process of testing.
Good.
And the second one will be again in the fact that you can imagine whatever. It's part of maybe your inspiration and motivation to do something. In
Good.
Spain, we still have king, so
Yeah,
maybe the
exactly.
king will
There
give you
are not
something.
many kings, but in Spain you do still have them. Exactly.
Spain, England, and
Yeah.
other Sweden, I think they have
Ireland, I
too.
think, does too. Denmark. Yeah.
Morocco, yeah.
Morocco. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree with you here. It's probably number one. And again, it's not too strange to hope that we might receive praise from powerful people, even if it's unlikely. But not to test armor after you repair it is dangerous, right? So he's acting dangerously. Could be a matter of life and death. He's not in his right mind here, right? So if we
Yeah.
want to show someone he's not in his right mind, so against his sanity and against his thoroughness, we choose evidence that everyone can agree with to show that he's not in touch with reality. Um, but I like that you pointed out that they put in smart earlier, because our two best evidences here are about his thoroughness and his sanity, but not necessarily his intelligence. So I think you struck upon um, a good thing to point out there, that we want our evidence to support our claims. So if a word in there is not supported by our claims, it's stronger without that word.
Hmm.
All right, let's skip this one because we did it a little last time. And we're going to come up with an analysis and then two pieces of evidence for that analysis, and we're going to make them this time. So could you read this paragraph? This is the introduction to a whole story by Shirley Jackson called "We Have Always Lived in the Castle." So could you read this first paragraph?
Sure. My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I'm 18 years old and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf because the two main fingers on both hands are the same length. But I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself and dogs and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagen and Amarita phalloides,
Mhm.
the death cap mushroom. Everyone else is my family. Everyone else in my family is dead. Okay.
Okay. So this, to me, this is one of my favorite book intros, because you can feel the discontinuity in the main character's mind. But what is your impression
So
of this
I
character,
don't know
Mary
what that
Catherine
means.
Blackwood?
Werewolf.
A werewolf is a man wolf. So if you've ever seen, have you seen Harry Potter 3, Prisoner
Sim,
of Azkaban?
sim.
Lupin is a werewolf. Professor Lupin is a werewolf.
So I don't get the fact that if you have the same length of fingers, then you're going to be a
So this
werewolf.
is probably going to be one of our evidences, right? See, I would say that Mary Catherine Blackwood is a little irrational, unreasonable. Uh, so she's holding on to this superstition. And it's a
Okay.
superstition that we probably have not heard of. I
Okay.
haven't. Um, but you see, she thinks she could have been born a werewolf. Her evidence is not good evidence. It's because her two middle fingers are the same length. This isn't good evidence, right? So
Yeah.
she's
Okay.
not very good
Yeah.
at drawing proper conclusions.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you don't understand in here?
Well, I find weird that this like washing myself and dogs and noise like also looks like not make too much sense. And
Yeah.
also the use of and when you are number things, I
Mhm.
will not repeat and.
Yeah. So she's repetitive. She's very repetitive. She does the same thing. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita
Yeah.
phalloides, the death cup mushroom. Well, just like the I don't
Phalois,
like,
what that mean? Yeah, what is
fellow, I,
Amarita phalois? Is a plant, a
I think it's a
flower?
plant. Yeah.
Amarita phalois. The dead cat moonstone also is a plant. So also here it's like, yeah,
Just
she
plants
jumped
are
from one
people.
thing to another that not
Yeah.
make too much
Plants.
connection.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
these aren't really equivalents. So she's equating things in her mind that aren't actually equal, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
the end is also weird because she's talking about people, then plants, and the rest is in my family is there. Anyone else?
Yeah.
So
So
again, it's another like,
yeah,
okay,
she's not making connections between her thoughts, right? Her thoughts are
yeah,
disjointed. So what do
yeah.
you
This
think about Mary Catherine Blackwood?
what I think that she is creating that in purpose. So
Mhm,
you need to think through. It's a
mhm,
way to call your attention,
mhm.
and it's a way to think out of the box. Like if for example, I'm very visual, so when I read
Yeah.
in my mind, I kind of make pictures, so I can see she disliking washing herself, so I was picture the fact that you are washing, and then dogs, so I
Mhm.
went completely different place, and then
Right.
noise, and that put me in another completely atmosphere. So
Mhm,
I think that is a way to think out of the box to
mhm.
call
I,
attention.
I think it puts you into the mind of Mary Catherine Blackwood, right? It makes you feel the the confusion in her mind.
Yeah, if I don't know about her life,
Mhm,
so I don't know if her mind was like that too, but
mhm.
sounds like yeah, a little everywhere.
Yeah, it's a little everywhere. And okay, well, I think that's some good practice. Let's move on to our narrative essay. Again, we're going to come back to expository essays in 2 weeks, but we're going to focus on a narrative essay here for 2 weeks. So a
Okay.
narrative essay, although it is about real life events for you, we're still going to want to tell it like it's a story. So we're going to want some sort of a hook, something to grab their attention. We're going to need to give them some setting and some background. These often serve as either the first paragraph or the first two paragraphs, depending on how long your essay is. Then we're going
Mhm.
to need the main event. This is going to get us to the climax of action. I need to know what was the problem or what was the main circumstances that basically what is the point of this story? What are your thoughts on it? Some resolution. How did you overcome this difficulty? How was this problem solved? And then we're going to need some resolve. What's the moral or the takeaway from this story? Why is it important for the reader to read this story? Okay, so in order to do that, we are going to, let me share a new screen here. We're going to read a story by uh, Charles Ryrie. And Charles Ryrie, we read a bit by him last time, but we're going to read a little bit more. He's going to tell us a story about something that happened while he was a leader at a camp. And we're going to look at how does he get our attention? He grabs our thoughts, gives us something to think about as we go through. He tells us the story, and then he tells us what we should think about the story. So could you read these first two paragraphs up to right before One Friday Night?
Grace Grace is a difficult, perhaps impossible concept to understand. In seminary days, I have a job working with unprivileged junior high and high school kids at the downtown YMCA on what was then the
Mhm.
outskirt of Dallas. Was a camp we used every Friday night when weather permit. We would load a bus with 40 to 50 kids, head for the camp, and enjoy an evening cookout and games. On a special occasion, we would sleep there overnight and return Saturday afternoon. Overnight camping trips were usually rewards given to those who had successfully passed, cer- passed certain requirements in our weekly Bible class. So the kids who stayed overnight after the others went home were rather special.
Okay, so you see the first paragraph is just a single sentence, right? It gives us
Yeah,
the main topic. It gives us a hook, something to think about, because
yeah,
it put this thought in our mind. Grace is difficult, perhaps even impossible to understand, right? Well, then in his next paragraph, he's giving us the background, the setting. He's setting up the story that he's about to tell us. He hasn't yet told us what the conflict or the rising action in his story is.
yeah. That makes sense. It's explaining a normal situation with a normal kind of behavior. You're going to reward the good ones, and
Yeah.
that is good.
And we need some context, right? So that we can
Yeah.
understand what he's going to tell us later. We need to understand the background to this event. So
Yes.
let's read about the main event here, one Friday night.
One Friday night, or more accurately, early one Saturday morning, I woke startled by some unexplained noise. Soon I discovered that a few of my leaders had sneaked out of the dorm, gone down to the lake, launched one of the boats, and were having a great time far from shore. Not only was this against every rule in the book, but it was dangerous. When the kids knew, I knew where they were. They came immediately into shore. Like dogs with tails between their legs, they meekly went back to bed, wondering what punishment awaited them in the morning.
Right. So here's the climax of our story, right? Here's the main conflict.
Uh,
We,
Wait a moment, I have a call from the teacher. So, un
okay,
momento. Sí, maestra, ¿qué tal?
good news.
So,
All
yes,
right.
we were in the high part when now something happened. Yes, now it's like,
Mhm.
uh-oh, and now what?
Right. So, and it leaves us at the end of this paragraph with a bit of anticipation. It's a cliffhanger right here. We want to know what happens.
Yeah,
So could you read the next two paragraphs here?
okay. For me, sleep was now impossible. The night before, I had talked to these Christian young people about forgiving one another. So as I paced the ground in those early mornings hours, deliberating their
Mhm.
faith, my own words from the night before kept coming back to me and back to me and back to me. If I don't give them some punishment, I argued with myself, they will never be impressed with the seriousness of what they did. I have a responsibility to the why to enforce the rules and punish the violators.
Right.
But the
So
more I debate, I continue.
let's talk about this really quick.
Vale.
Notice that he's given the big situation, the big conflict that's outside, but then now he's also going to talk about the conflict inside himself, because it's going to be these two conflicts that are in conflict with one another. So yeah, you can keep going here. Let's see what he
Okay.
was talking to himself about.
Okay. So, but the more I debate with myself, to the Lord, talks to the Lord,
Mhm.
thought about a number of relevant Bible verses, I discovered again that night that you can prove almost anything with a Bible verse. The more Ephesians 4:32 grew large and large in my thinking. Be kind to one another, tender heart, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you.
So now here's going to be an argument he has with himself in his mind. So if you can read these sentences here.
But Lord, I can't forgive them. They don't deserve it. Neither I did. But Lord, I have to enforce the rules. I'm glad, Lord, you didn't. But Lord, if I am too kind, the kids will think I'm weak. I never thought you were weak, only loving. But Lord, first I will make them promise never to do something like this again, and then I will forgive them. That is good thing you didn't require that of me, or I never would have been forgiven. Just as God forgave me. How was that? No conditions or promise ahead of time, no works at the time, no remembrance afterward. But Lord, you are God. You can do anything. You are my child, he said. Imitate me. Imitate
Imitate.
me.
Mhm, mhm,
Imitate me. So, with great reluctance and with very little faith, I told the Lord I would. Then in the morning, I told the kids, you did a terrible thing. I could have had disastrous, it could have had disastrous consequence for yourself, your families, the why and me. But I forgive you unconditionally and completely. You are kidding, they say. There's got to be a catch somewhere. No, I insist. You are fully forgiven. And then I told them that the Lord had been saying to me that night about His grace and how I wanted them to have another taste of that grace.
mhm.
I didn't even make them do the cleaning up that day. I did myself because I didn't want them to think they could earn even a little bit of that forgiveness. The rest of the story, as long as those particular kids were in my club, they were the epitome, as much as kids
Mhm,
that age can be,
mhm.
of goodness, helpfulness, and usefulness.
Mhm.
They never presume on that grace. Grace
Okay,
is in need.
let's
Oh,
that's okay. Let's pause there because if he ended his story here, he would have a complete narrative essay. That
yeah,
would complete a narrative essay because it even gives us a little takeaway, right? What's the point of this
yeah,
whole story? His grace made them thankful, and out of thankfulness rather than fear, they were uh, improved their behavior. So you can see here, Charles Ryrie has written a narrative essay to begin a chapter about something he wants to go into more detail and tell us. And it's a very effective way to convey information, right? We can say a lot more with fiction than we can with nonfiction. So this is essentially what we're going to do. We're going to write a narrative essay, and we're going to make sure that there's some moral to this narrative essay. So I think we selected your first time out of the country, your first time abroad.
yeah.
So while you're brainstorming for your essay, try to think, what lesson did you learn while you were away for the first time? And what lesson can you teach through your narrative to the reader? Because we want to leave them with some takeaway. So try to come up with your outline of your story. What's the beginning? How did the action rise and how did it fall towards resolution? And what's the moral they can take away? So that's going to be your homework this week, is just coming up with the basic outline for your narrative essay. What do you want to
Okay.
say? How do you want to convey it?